entropy's a bitch, and entropy exists in everything.
A system such as you're describing would need to have some kind of means of control, some authority. And the the inevitable outcome of such a system is corruption.
You remember that episode of Star Trek? If there were a UBI, do you think prisoners should get it?
Yeah. I mean, if they're still citizens.
Oh, that's a fine. Oop, that's jail time. Oop,
Execution. All right, everybody, welcome to another kitchen sink microscopy. I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and we'd love it if you'd like and share this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down there in the comment section. I'm sure there will be comments down there for this one, and try to keep the flame wars to a minimum if possible. Be gracious to one another. So
flame off. Comic book nerds will get it. I am Casey Rochford, not such a big comic book nerd, but I might be known to own a comic or two. And speaking of comics, thinking of doing a comic with the concept album. Concept album, you say? Oh, we write music, and you'll hear some of that music at the end of this episode. So you'll want to hang out through the whole thing. Not that you can skip through or anything. Like we've disabled that. Don't even try. Yeah. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, this is probably going to be kind of a topic that's going to go in a bunch of different directions, knowing us.
As usual.
Yeah. But so, like on the radio the other day, there was some politician. They were talking about. I was listening to talk radio, and I can't remember which politician they were talking about, but this particular politician in question had suggested an idea, like in the U.S., of essentially getting rid of all entitlement programs and replacing it with a UBI, universal basic income. For those who don't know what that means, essentially, like everybody would basically every month or whatever. Everybody in the country gets a set amount of money, and that's that. And he suggested this because he's like, well, it would actually be way, way, way cheaper and probably way more effective to just do that. And also simple too, because it's like, well, you don't need a whole massive bureaucracy to run all this stuff and all this paperwork and stuff. No, it's like, if you just get a check every month or whatever, a direct deposit. Everybody does.
Yeah. So I'm like on the fence with that. I can see how that works on paper. I guess I have a few questions. Like, number one, how much would it be?
Oh,
there's Floyd.
Yeah.
Number one, how much would it be? Number two, what do they consider entitlement programs? And third, and most importantly, whatever these entitlement programs are, the name entitlement suggests that they're actually very important things. So would there be some kind of regulation on the pricing in place? Because what good is a UBI if you look at the minimum wage, right? That's supposed to be the minimum amount to buy a house and a car and raise your family with, but it doesn't do that anymore because capitalism, and so
because corporatocracy, but that is getting into the weeds there, but
yeah. I mean, like, so like to me, there would have to be like, kind of that trifecta of like really defining like what basic human needs are, and saying like, okay, these can't be for profit, you know, institutions, and then hand out a UBI, and then you're not like funneling a whole bunch of money into something that people may or may not use. They pay for whatever they use. Like I see the benefit there.
Yeah, I mean, I oh boy, this is a. I've got so many thoughts about the concept of the UBI. Like, oh, man, I mean, where to begin? Um, well, to go and answer your question as to like how much, I think that would just be a thing that would have to be calculated.
Yeah.
And it's really hard in a place like the US where there are very big differences in cost of living from one area to the next, where like an amount of money that would allow you to live like a king in
Right.
Kentucky, you'd be living on the street if you were in LA.
Well, that's actually like the biggest argument for regulating certain things, because that really simplifies like what you're just talking about. Like a gallon of milk would be 50 cents in Hawaii or in Kansas, like, and there would just be like systems in place that, say, okay, these are businesses that provide like absolute necessities of life. So there'll be a UBI for people that puts a regulation in place, and we'll put a certain amount of money into it to make sure they never go under. Like that should really be the role of government. It's just making sure that we're able to take care of ourselves and not actually being in charge of taking care of us.
Ooh, boy, that's a big ass can of worms right there. Oh man. Um, well, let's just start with like the concept of the UBI and stuff. And like I said, it's going to be your cost of living is going to be different in different places. So if let's say I were somehow thrust into the position of being in charge of dishing out a UBI to everybody in the country, um, I think it would the most logical thing would be to calculate what the cost of living is in a particular region and give people that kind of amount of money, uh, because obviously, yeah, you can't it can't be one size fits all. There's absolutely no way. There's just you know different costs in different places.
Yeah,
um
but then the fair tax was positing something similar to that, where there was like a set amount. I think it was $2,000 a month or $1,000 a month or something for
mhm.
basic needs that everybody got, even the rich.
Yeah.
Like everybody got the same thing, and then the whole premise was that that should be enough to give anybody the room to get what they need.
And
And
actually, yeah, the fair tax system is pretty reasonable. Like it certainly makes more sense than what the way things are currently conducted. That's the thing. It's like
yeah,
I don't know that there is a magic bullet solution that's just like, oh yeah, just take this pill and you're going to be better. Like no, no, no. It's way more complicated than that. It and maybe and trying to manage something like that is nigh impossible.
yeah.
Um, but making some kind of incremental improvement
Mhm.
is certainly worthwhile. And maybe a system like that it would certainly be less complicated for people, and I like that, and certainly less complicated to manage. It's super simple,
Yeah,
and I like
simple is
that.
good.
Yeah, and of course, with like the fair tax, it captures tax money from places where you can't get it currently with the current system.
Mhm.
And that, of
Yeah.
course, the fair tax eliminate it like completely shuts down all those people's arguments about like, oh, all these people coming across the border and working under the table and blah blah blah. Yeah, well, now they're paying too
Right, right.
automatically, and so it's
Yeah,
like, well, you can't make that argument anymore. Um,
yeah. I feel like I mean, there are shortcomings with the fair tax, but um, like the fence I'm sitting on, I feel more inclined to lean toward UBI than the fair tax, but there's a lot of good ideas, a lot of great ideas with the fair tax. And I feel like some kind of amalgamated system of kind of what I was talking about with like your essential things provided for by a small stipend out of income,
Mm-hmm.
just like talking a small one that gets divvied up very carefully and distributed evenly and whatnot. And then the fair tax system kind of takes care of like injecting money in through commerce, for
Mm-hmm.
all the other stuff, the stuff that we could live without, but we don't want to, and
Yeah.
that that makes more sense to me because it's like the things that are driving the things we want are buying the things that we want, and the things that are driving the things that we need are buying the things that we need.
Mm-hmm.
That I mean, that's logical, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I, yeah,
I mean, well, okay. Again, this is a very, very complex topic that probably deserves way more time and effort than we're putting in right now, or will have put in by the end of this episode. Um, but like, I guess my argument against a thing like UBI is that, well, we're basically we're fighting a tide that we're creating, essentially.
yeah,
Like, well, okay, why don't we just stop creating that tide, and then we won't need to worry about it, like inflation. That's really
yeah.
the thing, and it just keeps costs continue to go up. I mean, you just look at the inflation, like the cost or the value of the dollar compared to commodities over time,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, it's gone down and down and down and down and down consistently. Never has it gone up. And so why don't we try to tackle that, because that is a manufactured problem that like we're
Oh yeah.
actively doing that. Like, I mean, the Federal Reserve is tasked with like a mandatory 2% inflation rate. Like, okay, well, why don't we not do that? How about we just don't do that and let things level out and allow people to be able to afford the things, like
Hmm.
where it'll reach an equilibrium. Even
I mean,
Floyd is like involved in this conversation. Floyd, hi.
forcing inflation like that is ridiculous for one thing, but I don't think it's even like the lion's share of what actually contributes to that, because there is like some natural market tide pulling that as well, right?
Oh, and it's global. Like that's the thing.
Yeah,
There's forces way beyond the
right.
yeah.
So what I'm thinking with that is like I'm all on board for like the Federal Reserve getting like at the very least a major overhaul.
If
Um,
not the going to the chopping block.
right, right. But like what I think is that a lot of inflation is driven by the ability of these companies who are in the industries that provide things that people need. They have that to hold over people's heads, like you need this, it costs what it costs, like,
Well,
and
yeah.
if you take that away, you have like taken a huge chunk of the power of like forcing inflation from this, let's call it corporatocracy angle, um because like then that power is gone. Like there's a UBI, and there would be like a regulated system for things that people need, and then you know what, like then actually like a free market. I think a free market was even, if anything, like is natural about that. I think it was naturally meant to be like in a luxury sense, like
Hmm.
outside of the things that you need. Like this is how economy works. But
Well, I mean, it's all it is individuals working like trading, but it's on a macro scale, basically. So you have micro behaviors that all kind of come together. But well, so I guess what you're talking about, the other than the UBI, you're advocating for price controls then?
Limited, yeah. Like for things like health and food and shelter and stuff like that, you know.
That does come with some potential downsides.
No, well, okay. So like you know how nonprofit organizations work, right? Like they're not poor. Like
Mhm.
they have like people driving fancy cars and shit too. Like they get to take a healthy paycheck.
Yeah.
Like they're not hurting by any
Well,
means.
some are not, just like a for-profit company.
Yeah.
But well, yeah,
But if it's
nonprofits.
like buttressed by the fact that it's providing like an actual need for humans, then you know, like then it's kind of secured and regulated. You know, like hey, you can't gouge the fuck out of people because then we have to raise the UBI, and where does all that money come from? You know, you just end up in the same cycle as the minimum wage. You know,
Yeah,
that's what I'm
yeah.
saying. Like,
Well, oh, geez, there's so many. Oh, I knew this would be a Pandora's
yeah,
box of an
I mean, you
episode.
can't get rid of greed, but if you can relegate greed to just be for things that you don't need,
Well, everybody's
then
greedy, the consumers and
that's what I'm saying.
you
Like,
know,
you can't get rid of it.
no,
Everybody's greedy, but people should have what they need.
greed is at the heart of the economic engine, essentially.
Yeah, and I don't believe economics are entirely natural. Like,
Well, it depends on your angle. Like economies naturally crop up within human societies and civilizations. I mean, it's just that the
this
current
is a
one.
social construct, though. Like, it,
But
I
of
think we
course
could
it
fight
is.
against it.
Well, I
Like,
mean, like for instance, well, it's just different in the U.S. and there's a central authority that is managing the trade medium, as opposed to it just being decided upon by a bunch of people. Like, oh well, these shells are really valuable, so these are the ones that I want so many of those shells, and I'm going to charge that many shells for this thing. I
yeah.
mean, that is not something that was made by a government. That's things that tribes do. That like
And nothing
it just
stops you from doing, like, you know, one-to-one barter with people, you know.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I mean, and that can work. It's just that it only works in a limited fashion.
Mhm.
On a large scale, you can't necessarily operate very well with strictly with barter. Uh,
No.
but you can,
And
on the in certain interactions, you certainly can.
that's where you start to see like the necessary evils of certain ways that we do things. You know, like entropy's a bitch, and entropy exists in everything. Like
Mhm.
chaos is trying to creep its way in everywhere, and that includes the economy. And you know, like, and it includes like social stuff and so on and so forth. So I try to see government as kind of like an assembly line production trying to maintain as best as it can. Nobody wins against entropy. Uh, it tries to maintain a structure so that people can exist as long as possible without entropy getting them, you know?
Well, and that's very altruistic, but one of the problems is in order to do that, in order to facilitate something like that, a system such as you're describing would need to have some kind of means of control, some authority. And the the inevitable outcome of such a system is corruption. And then at that point, it doesn't become a benefit, it becomes totalitarian and something that harms people. Just even in the US, look at it. I don't think anybody, no matter your political leanings, can look at the government as a whole and say, yeah, they're totally doing good all around. Everything is peachy. Like a long time ago, when things were very simple and the scope of government was very limited, I think the argument could be made that yeah, they generally overall do they provide a benefit, but now no, I would if
You
you
remember that episode of Star Trek, uh, TNG early on?
Mhm.
Um, they visited this utopian planet where people wear these skimpy clothes and stuff,
Mhm.
and you can kind of just like wander around and do what you want, and everybody's happy, like hippies and stuff. And then Wesley like fell on the lawn or something, and they're all like, "Get off my lawn!" And then they were like, "Sorry, we have to put you to death."
Yeah,
It's like like yes, at some point, like you can be all relaxed about stuff, but at some point, then you have to have like a hard line, and maybe that's a little too hard. So like you put like grades between it, and that's where you get like this system that we have. We're like, oh, that's a fine. Oop, that's jail time. Oop, uh, mm,
execution.
yeah, keep killing people. So
Yeah, yeah. Although I'm like very much against the death penalty. Just a personal note there that I don't think
mm,
that's ever justified. Um, like, well, and that's a whole different. That could be
well,
its own
actually,
episode.
that's a nice digression. If there were a UBI, do you think prisoners should get it?
Yeah, I mean, if they're still citizens, if they're still human beings,
Mhm.
And this is the thing. I don't like the idea of
Because I almost
this.
guarantee you they'd probably be like, nope, can't have it now.
No, no, because think about it. You're in you like okay, let's say me right now. Okay, me as myself, I did some stupid ass bureaucratic crime on accident, and there are many of those, and I land myself in prison for 20 years for doing something that I didn't even know was a crime. Well,
Mm,
okay, my cat, I would lose my cat for one. I'd lose this house and everything in it. Um, and then I'd be stuck in a cage for 2 decades or depending
mm,
with no means of basically once I'm done they'd let me out on the street and I'd have nothing. What
yeah.
then? Where do I begin from that point? I have nothing at all. So I think it's reasonable to say,
Mhm.
okay, well, if you're somebody who's in prison and there's a chance you're going to get out, well, why not? Why
Yeah.
not? Because what
I
okay,
agree. I
because
agree.
think about it. It's like I'm a law-abiding person. In general, I play by the rules. But if I were let out onto the street with literally nothing 20 years from now, like completely disconnected from societal change and technological evolution, there's no way I'm getting a job. So what would I do? I'd turn to crime. I'd probably
Right.
literally have to be a criminal to
Yeah.
survive. And
Yeah.
so,
Actually, like a UBI would actually be a great like crutch for rehabilitating people who have served their time in prison.
mhm,
Because if you just set it up so that like, okay, who's holding your mortgage or who you pay rent to? Okay, we're gonna put your UBI into a coffer,
mhm.
but we'll keep paying on this or that for your your house or whatever, and like an insurance for it or what, and the basics, right? And just kind of keep it there,
Yeah.
for you to like come home to, so
Yeah,
that you're not
exactly.
homeless and you're not completely like without any means whatsoever of
Well,
finding gainful
and
employment.
and actually, this segues into another benefit of something like a UBI when it comes to crime. Um, if you had, no matter where you live in the U.S., a minimum amount of money, even if it's something fairly minimal, like $1,000 a month, you're every month you get $1,000. That would probably reduce the incentive to be a criminal. Because, like, okay, well, maybe this isn't
Oh yeah.
quite enough to make ends meet, but here's the thing: I get $1,000, and I can go work at McDonald's part time and pay the bills. I don't even
I
have to have a
Yeah,
full time job.
that's an excellent point, because I feel like, I'm just throwing a number out there, it's not exact or anything, but like 95% of crime is probably driven by desperate need for
Poverty,
something. Yeah.
poverty. Well, look at where crime exists. It's where poverty is most prevalent.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
that's And
Yeah,
so
like UBI would totally fix that and totally remove like a huge financial drain on the
mhm.
government.
Well, and that's what this politician was arguing like for, was that it's like for every dollar that we give out to somebody in some kind of entitlement program, it costs like 10 or 100 times that just in the back end to manage all this shit. Where like, okay, well, if we didn't have any of that and it was just a default amount that everybody got, like, well, there you go. You're actually saving money by just handing out money to people, which
Mhm.
is kind of wild to think about. Um, and so and what you were saying too about like it how much would it be? And well, I just kind of made the point of like it doesn't have to be all of your expense needs. It just needs to be a little bit to bring you above a certain threshold to where, okay, well, now I don't quite have to make as much money. um like okay, I have at least this default amount.
Mhm.
Now of course, one of the issues with a universal basic income, like let's say everybody gets it, well, if you're talking the market and the economy, prices will just go up to reflect that influx of cash. Um, so
Right.
that's one of the potential pitfalls of
That's what I was talking about is like holding people over a barrel. When you do that with food and shelter and things like that, yeah, they don't have a choice. They have to make that money somehow.
well,
But when
people,
you do it with like Pokemon or something, like something they don't really need, then the market will actually reflect what people are willing to pay for something rather than just, you know, kowtowing to the people that can afford anything,
well,
you know.
prices are always basically set by the kind of the median of what the market will bear, no matter what. So
Eh,
that no, that's just a fact. That's how prices operate. And it's kind of like a back and forth between like the person selling and the person buying, or persons.
yeah,
Obviously,
okay,
it's not
so
just one
like
person.
if the median is like on a graph like this big, what
Mhm.
I'm talking about would make the median much more narrow, like
But you're
not
talking
so
about
much
price.
fluctuation.
You're talking about price controls.
Exactly.
Well, here's the problem too. Like, okay, it's not, you can't control what companies in China are selling things for. You can't control what say like oil is sold for from like Saudi Arabia. They are outside of our jurisdiction. So that's one of the issues there is like, okay, well, I mean, I'm sure you could dictatorially manipulate prices. But then of course what you're going to end up with is rationing, which and shortages of things. Because like for
I'm
instance,
well, I'm not talking about price controlling everything, mind you.
no,
Just
but okay, you used the example earlier of milk in say Hawaii, and did you say Kansas?
Kansas. Yeah.
Okay, so here's the problem. If you, let's say you make a gallon of milk 50 cents across the board unilaterally, no matter where you are in the US, a gallon of milk has to cost 50 cents.
Mhm.
Well, getting a gallon of milk to Kansas is significantly less resource intensive than getting a gallon of milk to Hawaii
Correct.
or Alaska, like deep
Correct.
into Alaska. So what would happen is people who ship those things are like, okay, let's say, oh, well, you know what? I could feasibly get a gallon of milk to this store in Kansas
Yeah.
and still make a little bit of money, but it will cost me money to bring it to Hawaii. So I'm just going to not do it. I'm not shipping there. We don't ship to Hawaii, our milk company, because it ends up costing us money to bring it there because it goes by boat or it goes by plane or whatever, and it's just too expensive. There's no way we could sell it for 50 cents. So like, I mean, I guess if there's a farm in Hawaii that can produce milk,
Yeah,
then
but
there you
no, that
go.
wouldn't happen. That wouldn't happen at all
What
because
wouldn't happen?
like you said, the median always like bears out, right? So if there's price controls on things like milk and it costs 500 to take it to Hawaii and 50 cents to go to Kansas and like $30 to go over here and like all that gets pooled together, provided for, so that you can stay in business by selling it for a certain amount, and it's more than you put into it, so that each of you gets a nice paycheck too. And that's how you regulate that system.
Okay,
Like
well,
when you pool things together, you have way more power to actually achieve any one thing within that pool than
with
you do if you just try to do it with the market the way it is, you know.
well, I mean that what you're saying about the pool is correct in that like a company that has a bunch of locations, say like a fast food restaurant, right? They can support keeping a location open that doesn't quite make that much money because
Mm-hmm.
of all the other ones. But the second that location starts to be in the red, where it's not making as much money, well, they're going to shut it down because it's like, well, consider, imagine yourself in as a business person. You run a
Yeah.
business, let's say a milk company. You have farms and you produce milk, and you know it's like, oh well, when I ship stuff to Kansas, I make money, but if I ship things to Hawaii, I lose money.
But you're
Why
still
would you?
thinking in a for-profit mentality.
But that's what you do as a business owner. Like that's why you start a business is to make money and grow.
I'm talking about making essentials not for profit.
Well, so that's basically like taking over whatever is deemed essential and having it government run or whatever.
Right. That's what I've been saying. Like, if you're going to have a UBI, that would have to be in place. Otherwise, like you even said it yourself, like if there's a UBI, people are just going to raise their prices. And if you don't allow people to raise
Okay, wait, wait,
prices
wait,
on
wait.
things that
No,
people
no,
need,
no. I said the prices will adjust to the medium of what the market will bear, and that means it's not
yeah,
that.
but
No, no, no. Okay,
like
hang on.
you can look with
Oh,
your own two eyes how
no,
that
no.
works in
Hold on.
reality.
Let me finish my point. It doesn't necessarily, like I said, it's a back and forth exchange. So it's like when you as a consumer go to buy a product, you analyze the price and you make a decision whether you're going to buy it or not. Like, oh, is that worthwhile? Can I afford that? And maybe you make a decision to buy something that's cheaper, or maybe you want something that's nicer and you happen to have a little more money. So it if you have more money to spend, you might be willing to pay more because now it's like, well, okay, I have a little more disposable income now. So if milk is now $3 instead of 50 cents, it's like I could totally shoulder that. That's no big deal. And so you're willing to pay it, and so the company can raise their price to meet that. It's like, so okay, think about it this way: gas prices. That's a good example. If the price of gas is purely based on greed alone, like the company, well, why 20 years ago didn't they just raise prices to what they are now? Why wasn't it like $5 or $6? I mean, that is kind of an essential thing. Why didn't they make it $5 or $6 a gallon 20 years ago?
Well, if you adjust for inflation, like that also kind of skews things a little bit.
Well,
But
no, I'm just it's basically like why wouldn't a Whopper be $20? They could just charge that, and I guess people would buy it, right? Or how come a carton of eggs isn't $20? Because like if it's just purely based on greed and it's an essential thing, they would simply charge the maximum they could possibly charge. Why not $100? You
yeah,
know?
like we're not talking about like a complete vacuum of, you know, nitpicking every little price
No, I'm just trying to
of things.
illustrate. This is just an example within a
Like
broader
like
picture.
if broccoli is harder to grow than carrots, you'll still have more money to spend on broccoli than the carrots, because of course they're going to maximize, like you want to be as efficient as possible with the money that you're, you know, allotted for something,
Of
and that
course.
includes the government, or it should.
Oh well, yeah.
You know,
That's a
so
boy. That's a whole
so
nother episode right there.
right, and you know,
No, I get what you're
when you
saying.
really
Like,
start thinking about things, and like trying to keep track in your head of like what if this were this way, what else would be different? Like your whole frame of thinking when you're analyzing something has to be in a different light. Like like you still have this like for-profit idea that like, oh, because this is more of a hassle, like we gotta either like shut this down entirely in this location or whatever. And it's like, no, I mean, the pool carries everything, as long as it falls within this, like category. Like, this goes back to the beginning when I was like, please define what you call these entitlements, which is kind of a tongue-in-cheek sort of jab, I feel.
No, I mean, it's just there has to be a word for whatever that is, and that's the word
Yeah.
that people use. I mean, I don't know. I didn't choose it. It's in a dictionary that predates my life on this planet, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I mean, rights and entitlements in the dictionary are one and the same. And
well, sort of. But the thing is, there are concepts that are actually different, and we need words to separate those. Like, and so it's like, well, I don't know what word do we make up a new word for this thing so that it's clear that this is that and this is that. I don't know. And that's why, like, I guess in my way of thinking, I have I separate them as negative rights and positive rights. I guess, but that's a whole rabbit hole that we don't necessarily need to go down.
Yeah. I can only wrap my head around so many things.
There's like my head is already swimming with so many fish thoughts, so I guess kind of what you're saying. Well, and oh boy, this is, well, it's like, okay, so let's say I don't know how this would be achieved with things being established such as they are. But let's say because I don't know what, well, you were saying define what is an entitlement. I'd say define what is essential. How do you separate an essential thing from a non-essential, or just something that's like, I don't know,
Maslow hierarchy or something?
Well, yeah, but like, okay, is fancy cheese like, is that the stuff that's the stuff where the little cheese block costs $15, or is it just that?
No. I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying, and that's why I was saying before, like, it's not this vacuum. Like, you can still get government cheese or the fancy cheese. You get the UBI. You get to divvy it up however you want. Like, if you want to blow all your UBI on Roquefort cheese, go right ahead and just brush your teeth before you talk to me.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I don't know how that could necessarily, how a system like that could be constructed, or
it would be like a market within the market, I guess, because like there would be obviously still supply and demand. Like, oh, nobody really wants this cheese, so we will make less of this cheese and we'll charge more for it, and some people will buy it. And
well, that's how the market works. Yeah.
It's like when we ran that newspaper route. It's like we were always trying to get that magic number of one return, like one newspaper left over. So you for sure nobody was like, oh shucks, I missed the newspaper.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I don't know. I mean, I guess it's like there would almost, what you're saying, to achieve that, almost you'd have to establish something that is essentially some kind of tax funded operation, this massive industrial process.
I mean, where would the UBI come from anyway? There obviously has to be some. And that's some tax somewhere.
Yeah, and the FairTax, like I said, it's a pretty decent incremental step towards simplification.
Yeah,
and it would certainly be an improvement over what we currently have, which is absolutely shit. Everybody agrees. Who whenever tax time, April 15th rolls around, who's like, wow, I'm really excited to do taxes. Literally nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody likes doing taxes. And it's like, well, okay, even because it's like, well, okay, either I got to sit there and do a bunch of shit, either on paper or online, and it's just really a headache and a nuisance, or you have to go to a company and pay them to figure out
Right.
all the shit. Like, imagine it if it was just incorporated into the sales tax. Like, you don't even have to think about it. You could, like, I could buy something from you, and you don't, like, for any amount of money, doesn't matter. Like,
All of it, the accountants will lose their jobs. Yeah. But if you do what I'm talking about, you regulate the essentials and you have to, like, you don't want to waste anything, right? So you have to carefully look at the supply and demand on a constant basis. And guess what that is? That's math. So all these accountants can stop doing taxes and start doing things that actually like feed and clothe people, and they go from being like hated people that every April 15th are like, ah, fuck you, like, to like, oh, these are great people. They, like, keep it from, keep the taxes from going up and blah, blah,
well,
blah.
that's a nice utopian vision, but I like trying
Hey,
to
why
actually.
not strive for a utopia?
Well, I think everybody does, and like I think that is sort of what people want. Obviously, people want a good life.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want things to be shit. Nobody wants that. Well, maybe there's some masochists out there that get off on it. But well, so I guess what you're talking about, though, in order to actually achieve that, you would need to construct a massive industrial facility or group of facilities that manufacture these essentials, like whatever it might be, like whatever is determined to be essential, like the basics, like, and those are the things that are set prices and are cheap, and probably not high quality, but hey, you got it at least. Hey, it's a shirt, right? Um, Probably even prefab housing, which actually, honestly, I really wish that would come back. Prefab
Mm-hmm.
housing is awesome. During, because I was just watching a video recently about like after all, like in London and the surrounding area in World War II, when the Germans like bombed the shit out of things, there were like a million people that lost their housing. And
Yeah.
so they created this kind of like, well, there were a couple different variations of these prefab houses that were very quickly built, to basically get people in shelter really quickly and cheaply. And some of them are still around today. Like they were
Mm-hmm.
only built to last like 15 years and they're still around today.
Yeah.
Like there's some of them, and a lot were just demolished to make way for newer and better things, which was actually the intent. They weren't intended to be permanent housing for the rest of, eternity.
Yeah.
But so maybe something like that. I would say maybe not quite like the way they did it, like maybe more like the Sears house on
Right.
a truck, in a truck that they would drop off a bunch of stuff and you'd assemble it yourself.
Mm.
That would be cool.
Well, and that's just the thing. Like when you have a public option for something, that doesn't necessarily negate the existence of a private option, too.
Of course not.
Like you'll still have a nice fancy gourmet restaurant if you don't feel like cooking.
Well,
And
even
you,
even even in the UK and
yeah,
Canada that have the socialized medicine, they're still
and here
private.
in Germany,
Yeah,
yep,
yeah. There's
same thing here. Yeah,
mhm.
and you get, of course, faster appointments with private health insurance and stuff like that.
Sure, it's just like it
Better doctors, and
paying an expedite fee, basically, right?
exactly. So
Well,
like,
and that's
and
where,
it functions well. You know,
well, and that
not
it does.
perfect, but
Well, no, and like again, I look at that. That's my point. Is like nothing will ever be perfect, but it does come down to management and how it's managed, and that really is the crux of my
mm,
concern about any of that stuff. Is like, well, the kind of authority that we need to give to this, whatever it is, this system, does invite corruption, and it invites people to take advantage of it. And I don't know how you can avoid that.
yeah.
That's the big thing. It's like I no, like I totally like.
Yeah, I mean that would be my question. Like without regulation, what would you do to prevent that from being a completely wasted effort? Like,
and the
oh, we
problem is,
changed all of this just to have the same shit happen. Like,
even like you can't, regulation isn't even enough, because the system that regulates things can also become corrupted and work in its own self-interest or the interests of other parties that have nothing to do with the beneficiaries of said system. And I don't, and it's human nature.
Checks and balances are definitely
well, and that's, honestly, like we've talked about many times, the only way you could really kind of get close to a neutral system is with AI. That's the only way. Like, you cannot have human beings like being the decision makers, the ultimate decision makers for something like that. It has to be a completely external system that's beyond control of the actors that are operating the system. I don't know what that would look like, but I'm sure it's achievable in some form or another.
All throughout, even science fiction, utopia, dystopia stories, you often see a big brother, like a technological central reliance point, right?
It's a technocracy,
yeah. And it's kind of interesting, that like now we're getting to a point as a society where we actually have AI and we see how it works and we see the potentials, and we're actually being kind of like, maybe AI should be the government, and like, well, that
yeah, well, you're
at
right.
least
You're right.
In fiction, that hasn't always gone so well. But
no, that's true.
In reality, maybe it would.
It might. It's very possible. It just, again, it depends on how it's built. Like what it looks like. And who
fiction, is. You got to remember, fiction's there to entertain. So of course, like, it's not very entertaining if everybody's all happy and there's no conflict.
That's true. Well, and science fiction tends to include like social commentary or cautionary tales and things like where the giant overlord system, whatever it might be, Big Brother system, takes over. Like, yeah, that makes for a compelling story, and it is it's a reasonable cautionary tale. I think it's like, well, maybe do we want to give over all control to this if we don't understand it? Especially because, like, well, as soon as it changes, we totally have no control over it, and it owns us.
Yeah, I think AI could only be given a position of power over us if it were AAI, like autonomous artificial intelligence. Like, nobody is controlling it.
Yeah.
That's the linchpin, I think, because that's your weak point for corruption to creep its way in.
Yeah, that's
like
true.
Like, if we had a system where we all just collectively, like, say, hey, like, we've ran this through some tests, like, given it all kinds of ethical questions all the greatest minds could think of, and it's, giving out answers that everyone's like, you know what, I can live with that. And then they put it in place, it would have to be like, we just kind of let go and let it do what it does, and we have no way of going back from that point on,
let God, so to speak.
Boy. I'll admit that's a scary thought, but it is. In order to grow, you have to kind of jump out of the nest.
And that is, there are certain times where you just kind of have to, like, let go of certain things to move forward, or to truly live, I suppose. Stop worrying so much about the what ifs, because, like, well, there's endless what ifs.
Oh yeah.
And
we wouldn't have this channel if there weren't.
I know. Well, here's the thing too. It's like when us humans analyze all the what ifs and the different various scenarios and whatnot, it doesn't matter if you're like the dumbest idiot like myself, or if you're the most brilliant mind,
like myself.
Yeah. um, no matter whatever things we conjure up in our minds of the possibilities, what ends up actually happening is none of those.
Right.
It's something we didn't even anticipate. Like, for instance, the COVID stuff. Like, I have, I have a lot of prepping supplies, a lot of survival stuff, more than most people. And even I didn't anticipate.
You only had 4 rolls of toilet.
Yeah, I did have a little bit more because I tend to buy ahead of the stock. But it wasn't, I didn't anticipate that happening. There's no way. Nobody could have called it. I mean, you know, I watched all these prepping channels for decades, and like people are like, oh, you need this and that and this and that. Nobody ever said toilet paper. Nobody was even thinking toilet paper. But it's like,
I even remember saying it to you when I was looking at your room full of prepping stuff, and I saw the 1 4-pack of Dollar Tree toilet paper. I was like, that's it? How long are you bugging out for?
I did actually have a little bit more than that because, like, in my medical stuff, there was a few more rolls. But like, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, we don't necessarily know what the future is going to hold, and we can't predict the course of things because all of the elements that are the variables are
we can't prepare for everything anyway. So like I've asked you this before. I was like, so if you have to bug out, how the fuck do you get all this shit out of this room and into what, and then go where? You know, like,
well,
you have to pick and choose what you take, and it's gonna run out at some point, and you got to find an alternative. So you're probably gonna use leaves instead of toilet paper at some point anyway.
Pretty much. And generally speaking, my plan is a long time ago, the whole bug out idea was present, but now it's bunker in. It's the only thing that really makes sense. Have a team, have friends and people that you can trust and get together. And that's why I stockpile a lot of stuff. Cause it's like, it's not just for me. It's for because it's like, what am I never going to sleep? No, you can't. That's stupid. But anyway, that's
I just got an idea for a Halloween special that we should do.
Okay.
There's an alien attack, and you and I are both bunkering in our respective locations.
Ooh, that's a good. Yeah, I like that. That could go places. Let's make note of that then.
Yeah.
Well, we have a little over a year to make that happen, so I think we can. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that there's really a solution to things. I mean, it kind of going back to sort of like the early days of this conversation. I think it might be better, instead of trying to swim against the tide, it might be better to try to figure out why the tide is changing, or why the water's flowing the direction it is, or whatever, and start there. Start at the source, because it is kind of a self-imposed suffering and misery, really, if you think about it. Like, we don't need government to solve the problem that government created. We need government to stop creating that problem, right? Like, I mean, I think everybody can kind of get behind. Let's start. Why don't we start there and then see what happens? And then we can, it's like engineering. You don't go all the way to the end. You don't just, I guess we're building the moon rocket and off we go to the moon. No, you build test rigs, you launch a few trial runs, you see what happens, you adjust and you modify slowly over time, and you build it better and better. And then you have failures and setbacks, and you learn from those, and you make small improvements. And then eventually you land on the moon. It was Apollo 11 was the one that did it. So that tells you something. It was,
it's actually a pretty impressively low number when you think about it.
I know.
If you and I were doing it, it'd probably be like Apollo 3,412.
Exactly. Well, in Apollo 13 too, they had failures and they still got people back to Earth. That just shows how well engineered that system was, and how well oiled that team was. Because it wasn't just like, those 3 astronauts, they just looked through some manuals and they figured it out. No, there was a whole team back on Earth putting things together and running simulations and seeing like it was amazing. That right there is one of those kind of people say like the moon landing, like Apollo 11 and setting foot on the moon was like the most incredible thing. No, the most incredible thing that demonstrates how awesome human beings can work together was Apollo 13.
Right.
Like that was the truly
and things like that, you know, like there's humanity's replete with stories similar to that, you know, like people going above and beyond the expectations of what we can endure in order to save lives of strangers, you know.
Or accomplishing something that was seemingly impossible. And that right there, it kind of that I guess that sort of goes into what my thought is about all this is like, I don't think anything like that can really, like, solutions to our really core human problems and concerns can really be solved without participation of everybody.
And experimentation.
Yes.
Like we can't just talk about shit. We actually have to try it. Here in Germany, or maybe it's just in my Bundesland, there's an actual UBI experiment. It's treated kind of like a lottery, only you don't buy any tickets. You just sign up with your email, and you might win €1,000 a month for a year, just to see what it would be like if there was a UBI of €1,000. Like, and that's more like, that's nothing like I was talking about with like complicated, like, you know, changing things to where certain things are regulated and certain things aren't, and blah blah blah. It's more like, would you work fewer hours? Would you just buy nicer things? Like, how would that go? It's an experiment.
And I totally agree. Like, it, because the thing is, a lot of these kinds of discussions about stuff like UBI, it's speculative because nobody knows. You know, like, I get in conversations with people about anarchism and anarchist societies, and it's basically speculative because, well, we don't really have that. We haven't tested that yet.
To my knowledge, neither UBI or anarchism ever actually truly existed, nor communism. You know, like all these things that we're so sure don't work, we've never actually tried.
Well, and like what you're saying about that UBI experiment in Germany, I think it's not the best kind of experiment because
it's better than nothing, but
well, here's the thing too. Just like with engineering, you might be like, well, we're going to try a UBI and see what happens. Well, okay, if it doesn't work out, now you analyze why it didn't work out and you can make adjustments. And you might find out, well, there is actually a thing we can do, but it's totally not what we thought we were going to do now, because we've learned some stuff. And the only way to do it, like, because it sounds like it's kind of a distributed thing where just people here and there get it, but not everybody. The only way to do that,
it won't really affect the market.
No, because what you need is you need to have a location, an isolated location, or not necessarily isolated, but a corralled location, where like everybody, say like in the US, you take a whole city or a whole county or something, and everybody gets it within that county, and then you compare. Or you could even say like, well, okay, everybody like around here, you say, okay, everybody in Kitsap County, they get $1,000 a month. Everybody in Pierce County, they get $1,500 a month or whatever. And you just kind of look at what happens.
And on that small of a scale, like, actually, this would even make more sense from an experimental standpoint, but you could really make sure it stays in that concentrated area by issuing a debit card that is not useful in the next county over at all. You know, like, it works where you live so that they can monitor how it affects the economy.
The only problem with that is people buy online a lot of the time. So it's like, how do you deal with that?
Well, it wouldn't work then.
Well, no, I think it would make sense to say, like, just to see human behavior and see, okay, well, how does, because a place like Pierce County is pretty big. That would be a very big experimental area within this region. And so you could definitely see some kind of effect, whatever it might be. hey, do people work less? Do people not work at all? Do people work more?
Rural areas, metropolitan
Yeah,
areas.
yeah. Well, and that's where it's like maybe Kitsap County is a bad example, is the sister experiment.
Right.
Maybe on the other side of the mountains, right?
Yeah.
Over by
Yeah.
Yakima and stuff. Try that area.
Yeah.
And just see, like, okay, we're gonna give maybe the same amount of money to people in both of these areas and just see what happens.
Mm.
And I like, honestly, I think that's a worthy use of tax money, just to, because it's like, well,
Right.
if we find out that in fact it does have a positive effect, then okay, well, now we have something, we have a beginning rung,
Yeah.
like, to step
You
on, to start talking.
you have to experiment in different um, um, economically advantaged regions as well,
Yeah.
because like you might then find that like people in Beverly Hills with the UBI are like more strongly buttressing all these like great charity organizations or something.
Yeah.
Like there's so many different ways you can spend money.
That's a good point, that you might, yeah, in an affluent area, they might be perfectly okay
Mm-hmm.
already. And so if they get an extra $1,000 a month, they're like, well, I'm just going to give it to charity.
Yeah, because people are always saying like, well, yeah, the UBI is great, but what about the rich? They don't need that shit. And it's like, well, if the government just says, would you like this to be directed toward a charity of your choice,
Mm-hmm.
make it nice and easy, then
Yeah.
people might be like, you know what, I don't need that money. Yeah, like I lost my mom to cancer. I'll just donate something to cancer research. Like
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, yeah, because it's like it would be a drop in the bucket for those people. So they'd be
right.
more inclined to do that. Um, yeah, but I mean, we have to, in order to actually have a conversation, we have to have data about that, because it is very
Mm-hmm.
speculative. We don't
Mm-hmm.
have, like, again, it's all what ifs. It's like, oh, well, I think it's going to be like this, or it's going to be like that, or it's going to do this, it's going to be good,
Yeah.
it's going to be bad, or this is going to be the result. Well, we don't fucking know, because
Yeah.
we've never actually tested it before.
Yeah, and statistics only go so far. Like the UBI, maybe everybody just buys cool shit, but the rich guy that goes and buys the yacht with his extra $1,000 a month because he
Mm-hmm.
was $1,000 short, I guess. Um, he buys it from a guy who's selling yachts. That guy who sold the yacht is like, I'm really passionate about donating to cancer, and he donates to cancer. So like
Yeah.
the
Or,
statistic misses that,
or maybe his company was about to go under, and now with this influx of purchasing, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
say, again, it's like, we can,
Butterfly effects, man.
well, yeah, we can certainly, there's certain economic processes that can be applied to things that are kind of like, laws, I guess. But this particular thing has not really been studied in quite the way that's necessary to yield the right kind of data. So it ends up being completely hypothetical and speculative, because it's like, well, you just use your imagination in that case, and it's like, well, that doesn't work. That isn't facts. That's not data.
Yeah.
And so I would totally be on board for trying something like that out. Pick a place that's fairly well off, or moderate. Um, Try that there, and then find a place that's not so well off, and the same thing over there, and just give it a year or something, and just see what happens.
It's a bit of a digression, but something you said just gave me an idea. Like, there are no real laws in a scientific sense, anyway, when it comes to human nature.
Well, that's why
Um,
I was kind of like struggling to find the word, because it's
right.
like,
So, like, what if we just treated law as we know it as theory,
mhm.
and court was all about like you not saying whether or not you did it, but rather being like, here's why I did it.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, in
and
fact,
just making an argument for your situation, because there is nuance in everything.
there
Like,
definitely is. Well, common law and like law back in the past and stuff was kind of, essentially sort of just like theory, where it wasn't just one case particularly, it was many cases over time,
Mhm.
and many judgments over time that, like, okay, well, they add up to the weight of this is much heavier than the other,
Yeah.
and so therefore that's considered a law.
Yeah. But
And
if that's still just treated as a theory, like maybe it's just harder to prove your case of going against that flow, but you
yeah,
still could, like,
sure, well, and that's science, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's how it is. Like, well, okay,
And that takes away a lot of the psychological uh power behind the words that we attach to these things, like law, like black and white, this is wrong, this is right, and you're guilty or you're innocent or you're like we don't even say innocent. We're like, you're guilty or you're not so guilty, like like
well,
we acquit you.
when it comes to economics, there are like laws, sort of, but they're probabilistic. So it's like
I
this is
mean,
based on the history of observation. Like,
probabilistic automatically means it's not a law, though.
yep,
Like,
that's why I air quotes for that, because
yeah,
it's like
yeah.
these are things that they're axioms. They're things that you can say, okay, well, I can. It's pretty likely that if I do this, this is going to be the result. Not 100%, but it's
Mm,
much more likely it's going to be that than that, because we've observed this tendency over time for who knows how long. When it comes to economics, like thousands of years, really. Um,
yeah.
and so that's really what that comes down to. So maybe we need another term for it. Um,
Okay, well, to try to find an olive branch between the idea of regulating essentials and having a completely free market. Like, what if there were some kind of system where essentials were defined but left free, and your safe way can be like, I'm going to price things so people can afford them, and then your metropolitan market is going to price things so you can't afford it.
hmm.
But like, that's where all the rich people go, so they don't have to rub elbows with the poor people or whatever. Like, I mean, that's a lot more like how we do things now, but
Hmm.
there would still be like enough like market control in keeping things from getting too expensive at Safeway.
Yeah, well, and that is kind of where a UBI would actually adjust that a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't, because it's like I don't know how you could do that, without some kind of negative consequences. Um, and that's where, again, it comes back to, like, we need to experiment.
Hmm.
Um, we could try in a region, a UBI. We could try in a region price controls, and just see what happens. For give it a little bit of time, like not so much time as if it goes awry that it causes too much destruction, but just enough that we can observe and get enough data to kind of make sense of it. Like, oh, okay, well, we've established the variables at the beginning of the experiment, and now we are conducting the experiment. And now at the end of the experiment, we look at the same variables and see what's different.
Yeah.
That's the only way to really look at it. And then we can, then at that point, we actually have some meat to chew on, because right now we don't have it.
Yeah.
It's
I'll
like,
admit, like, while I don't understand this, the real estate market values change daily.
yes.
Like, I can't wrap my head around that, but it is true. So like, if you did take an experiment and confine it and do just that, you actually would see some usable data in a relatively short amount of time, whether it's food or shelter, because of
Yeah.
that very fact.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you could actually watch the changes in the market and compare it to the whole
Yeah.
outside.
Well, I would also like to see some, like, negation experiments. Like, okay, well, what happens if you take a region and get rid of all zoning? You say there's no such thing as zoning here. You can build 10-story apartment buildings wherever. You can build single family houses wherever. Even in the industrial areas, you could build industrial things wherever, even though it's like, well, okay, they're going to be close to like shipping and rail and whatnot. And, it just makes sense. And where there's space. But just see, like, hey, well, we haven't really done an experiment like that. Try that. Try places that have no tax and just see what happens. That kind of thing. Well,
maybe. Like, just thinking out loud here, like an industry that doesn't rely so much on train access, and they would rather save rent money by being out in the middle of the fucking field somewhere. Mm-hmm. And they're not overly polluting or anything, like that might be hugely beneficial to that company to where they don't have to raise prices so much.
Yeah.
Like I could definitely make an argument for relaxing or getting rid of zoning. Like it kind of makes sense where there's already people clustered together. But like,
yeah, but people,
that's the further out you go, the less you should be, because people need things nearby, and the further you are from civilization, the more you need these little pockets of people being able to do whatever they want to do where they want to do
it. Yeah, and you'll find people tend, like for instance, if I were to, let's say I'm moving to a different region, the unfamiliar place, and I want to buy a house or rent a house or whatever. I might want, now me, I'm pretty flexible. I don't mind being near industry and a little bit of commotion, but some people, they want it quiet. So, and that's a lot of people. They want like their neighborhood. They want, the kids have neighbor kids they can play with. It's kind of quiet here. They can do their studies without a bunch of noise and racket.
There's a lot of sense behind permitting and zoning.
Well, but you don't need it, because people will naturally tend towards the things that they desire. And so like, what's the point? That's my thought. But I mean, that would be a worthwhile experiment. Just like, hey, why don't we just see what happens if we just, because I think about this, there's an intersection in England that had tons of accidents and backups for days. Like it was so horrible. It was so dangerous and so slow. And there were all kinds of ideas proposed and things tried, like, well, we need more and more traffic signals and this and that. And one guy, I don't remember who, but he was like, well, why don't we just get rid of all the traffic signals? Just everybody there's a wide open space and everybody just goes where they want to go, whether it be on foot or in the car or whatever. People just drive. And
I remember the video of that.
Yeah. It was like almost overnight, because people realized as they approached that, like, oh, wait, I better pay attention. And you can see the videos of people like walking and riding their bikes and cars sort of just weaving between each other. And the backups are almost non-existent now.
Yeah, I don't know that it's faster. It's just like,
well, it's safer.
I can only imagine the amount of anxiety there is in going through an intersection like that with things coming at you from all angles, no matter how fast you're going. That is freaky.
You see, people are driving like just a couple miles an hour through. They're just cruising through, and people just kind of work with each other and go around. It actually, and that's where it's kind of like going back to the concept of letting go that we were talking about earlier. It's like, maybe this whole idea of clinging to the idea of control is actually what's hurting us. And then if we just let go and let people and humans figure their shit out on their own, then it might actually be better. Like it might end up being a better way to be. And I don't know. Like, so, I mean, because of course, me, I'm an anarchist. So it's like, I'm in favor of getting rid of all rules and regulations. I think they're actually hurting us more than they're helping us, but that's just me. And that's probably a topic for a completely different video. We're already over an hour in.
That's a good way to invite entropy. in my opinion.
But that can actually be a force for good. Because that's the thing. It's like entropy is not necessarily degradation. It that is a component of it, but it's
Hmm.
also a distribution. Like if you're talking about thermal energy, right? Things you put a hot thing near a cold thing,
the, the
in
things that were weak anyway are the first to break down.
yeah,
Yeah. Like, mhm.
yeah,
But
and
yeah, I mean, yeah. There's also a lot of like, uh, like mm, humans like uh routine. Like they like to know that they don't have to worry about certain things, and that is actually like from like a health standpoint and like a life expectancy standpoint, that is super important. It's not to be underestimated.
no,
That
you are 100% correct that like anxiety and tension and stuff
Yeah,
like that certainly is responsible for a lot of ills and woes that humans
yeah,
experience. Now, on the flip side, though, the challenges that we face are they spark um, inspiration for creation and
mm,
innovation and things that didn't exist before. And so it's like, well, we do need a little bit of that too.
mm.
We can't have life be completely good. Otherwise, we're going to just sit there and watch the monkeys all day and fart on the couch. Um, like, you got to have a little bit of strife and something to struggle against.
Hey man, I bet you've been spying on
but but that's the thing. It's like a lot of the great things that we've created, this life this world that we've crafted over all this time is the product of all the difficulty that we face. And
me.
so I don't think removing that entirely is necessarily a good idea.
Yeah,
Um, because humans, again, like you said, they like routine, but they also like a challenge.
yeah.
Uh, that's why sports is a thing.
Life is boring without it any
Yeah.
challenge,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like
and boredom's not good for health either. So
no, that's why like nobody watches the esports videos where somebody's playing a game on God mode. They watch it, the speed runs, and the like. Oh, we're setting it to the highest difficulty, and like people are like, oh my god, are they gonna make it? And then they get, and they're like, yeah, like that. Nobody would be cheering if you were running on God mode, where it's like, well, no matter what, you can't die, you can't lose. Um, so it, that's the balance. Like how do you achieve that balance?
what a fucking epic episode.
I know, man. Like what the hell? I knew this was going to be a good one.
like
Holy
like
shit!
there's so many good clips from this that like we could almost make like a half-hour video of just clips.
I know. I'm like almost tearing up a little bit by how good this is. This is really good.
Damn.
Oh, and we've planted so many seeds for discussion as well.
Yeah.
Like there so many good
Well,
points. And a
I
lot
think
we made some points that I've never heard anybody make before.
the world is poised for opportunity to make changes like this. In a recent lightning strikes twice for you and I just today. Um, I
What do you
had
mean? That
mentioned
was like 5 days ago.
I had mentioned the idea of like what would be the next moon landing, and I had this vision for like a world coming together rather than trying to conquer each other, and I feel like we're getting to a point as a race, a human race,
Mhm.
where that could actually be a road that we go down.
Yeah.
Like I'm not normally overly optimistic, at least not in my view. I've had people tell me I'm an optimist. I've had people tell me I'm like the most pessimistic person they've ever met. Um, so figure that out.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but like I think it could happen, you know.
Oh yeah. Well, and I've had people tell me that I'm, oh, you're like far right, and then people say, oh, you're far left, and I'm like, well, I'm
Mhm.
neither. So wrap
I
your,
get that too. Yeah.
you know,
I think I take that as a compliment, actually.
yeah,
Like that nobody can figure out that I'm neither,
yeah, exactly.
because nobody's neither.
They try to pigeonhole you, and
Like
it's like,
or nobody's either. Uh, yeah,
well,
like
you're right though that the world, because actually that lightning strikes twice is kind of the perfect exemplification of that concept, because my topic was about World War III and yours was talking about world peace, and
mm,
that is, you're right, the world is poised for something, some
yeah,
kind of change, and I would almost say a revolution,
yeah,
a global revolution. And it's a matter of like how the decision is really in our hands. Which way do we go? Do we
right,
go the path of conflict, or do we go the path of peace? Because we could go either way.
yeah. I mean, we've had already
Mm-hmm.
two world wars. You
Yeah.
know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, we won't be fooled again.
I fucking love that Bushism. It's so perfect. Oh
And
man.
and in that context, it kind of makes sense. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's why I feel a little optimistic about it. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody wants to push it to the point where there's another world war.
No, but
Because who wins from that? Like
no,
really?
it's the whole concept of the fourth turning, where like generations forget, or they die off. The ones that were in war, they die off, and they're forgotten, and the new
Mhm.
generations live in a world of peace, and they think like, oh yeah, whatever, everything's peachy. And, or maybe they think like war is glorious or something like that, because all that stuff has been forgotten, all the atrocities and the terror and all that stuff. And you know, maybe it's going to be something like Star Trek, because there was a like a World War III within the Star Trek universe, and after that war, people, the whole planet was like, you know, never again. Let's
Yeah.
not do that again. That was dumb.
But
And
again, I'd caution you against taking fiction too seriously. Like maybe it doesn't have to come to that.
I don't.
Maybe we can make the correct decisions before it gets to that point.
It doesn't have to come to that, because we have, all of us regular everyday people, we hold all the cards, we control the game ultimately. And so we don't have to let wars happen. We don't have to stand for that. I would say, like, you know, if there's any kind of thing you want to protest, fucking protest war, and the involvement in war, and the support of war.
Good God, y'all. It's a good vote.
Exactly. That would be a good point to end on, but yeah. Oh man. But yeah, we but here's the I guess the issue, the problem is that people are dumb. Um a lot, like, you know, the like, if you just look at the masses of people, they're kind of stupid. And I don't, you know, I'm not picking on any one person, but I'm saying like just the average person is pretty dumb.
I know you're talking to me. I know you're
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all right, man. I still love you. But the only way that people are really going to take notice and really be like, whoa, is if something absolutely spectacular happens.
yeah.
That's the only way they're going to notice. Because right now, most people think like, well, everything's fine, or it's kind of shitty, but whatever, and they don't really see the big picture. They I don't know. And they're kind of complacent. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's why certain people like just get up and lead without any kind of prompt is you know, they kind of look around at the situation and they're like, everybody's a fucking idiot and they just keep doing the same shit over and over again. I guess I'll do it myself, you know, like
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, and well, and the thing is too is I think a lot of people not really being very well informed about many things, and also not really having a sense of purpose internally, and a sense of place and a sense of self, they naturally are inclined to follow people who promise those things.
Yeah.
And it can be a force for good. It could be like, Gandhi or something, or it could be a Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my point, is like, we are in that position right now where one of those two forces could kind of come to the surface, be it one person or a group of people or whatever, who knows, or just some kind of movement on Reddit or something, like who's to say? But yeah, I definitely hope that it would be the change in the positive sense, because that's really what we need.
Yeah.
We don't need another war, and certainly now with the tools that we have, a world war would be, well, kind of the end of everything that you hold dear.
Yeah.
So it's
all these butterfly effects.
well, and that's my thought, is like, it's a pretty easy choice in my opinion.
Yeah. Like it's not a nuclear winter kind of end. It's more like just look at what COVID did to the world.
And that was a little guy.
Yeah.
Like ultimately,
like things will never go back to the way they were.
Nope.
That's evident now. Like, and
the impacts of that, it will be felt for generations and generations.
Yeah.
And that was, in the grand scheme of things, pretty insignificant compared to what could be the possibility of global conflict. I don't think people understand, too. That's the thing. People don't understand what that picture looks like. And it's not a good picture. There's a really, really excellent low budget film made in the UK back in, like, I think it was the 80s, called Threads. And I would highly recommend to anybody who thinks like, oh yeah, we should go to war today, watch that movie. It is not a good time, and it does not end well. I would highly recommend that. Of course, nobody's going to see this recommendation, but I'm still going to recommend it anyway.
Exactly. 0 people are watching this party.
Someday, though.
Someday.
Yeah. I mean, we just get enough traction, and I'm sure people go through our back catalog and binge watch it. Our Netflix show is coming soon. Oh yeah.
The sooner the better, I feel like, because there's enough nuggets where people would have to stop and think, you know what, like, could that be the case? Could that be at least close? Like, does it spark an idea of my own? Like, those are the reasons we do this show. Like, and I can't wait for the moments where our comments are filled with people being like, hey, that was a cool conversation. You know what it made me think of? And then they come up with something entirely way out in left field from what we were thinking. And, like, maybe a new episode would come out of that.
And that is, I think, what the world needs right now is innovation, conversation, things like that.
We've had episodes based off of comments before. Like that's what the world needs, is more conversation, more thinking, more like playing out scenarios and bouncing ideas off of each other. And
well, and you also have to, like, consideration for the state of the whole planet. Like, we are kind of all in this together. Like, there are things that, sure, you and I can't solve. If there's a leak in a pipe, I could probably take care of it. If there's a light switch that doesn't work, I can definitely take care of it. But
there's a problem, I can solve it.
Exactly. But like, you know, the bigger things, the things that require more actors in the play, yeah, we got to come together to affect change. And I don't know. And it's like, to me, I think what bothers me, I guess, the most, at least in the US, is this hyperfixation on politics. Like, dude, just stop. Stop with the stop. You're wasting your time arguing and focusing on politics and watching the news and following every little like minute detail about what's going on. No, no, no. If you took half of that energy and put it to working with other people who took half of that energy, and we all work to like solve a common problem, we can do anything. It, it
Like, what if people utilized the brilliance and the potential of the internet, which still so far is largely unchecked by a central authority, largely.
Yeah.
Uh,
Tor, you just go with Tor and you're good to go.
yeah, and created a hive mind. Like, just exist, and if there's a problem, bring it to the hive mind.
Yeah.
And kitchen sink microscopy will solve your problems.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That's all we need. That's really all we need. Like,
it's like the economic concept that like the wisdom of the crowds, basically. Like, if you get enough minds together, you're going to get some stupid ideas, you're going to get some forgotten brilliant ideas, but like the middle of it will be like, oh, that's the solution.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's the thing that we should be doing. Like,
well, you pair that with AI, which can, like, in the blink of an eye, pare down all these ideas that come through the hive mind to solve a particular problem. Like, you don't really have to wait or wade through anything.
Yeah.
Like, it could be a human AI hybrid Google situation.
Well, like, and actually, a good example of that is all you have to do is look up like all these cold case crimes that were solved by people on Reddit
or podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. Or all these kind of forums,
like true crime podcasts, and
where you get a bunch of minds together, and this is the thing too. It's like detectives physically in that location couldn't figure that crime out, and it just got forgotten. And 20 years later, a bunch of people on Reddit solved the case. Like, they weren't even there, but they just got enough minds together and talked about it.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That is super amazing. And I think that's proof of concept for what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, just let's do that while we still can. And I mean, shit, I bet that's simple enough to set up that you and I could just do that. Actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we already have a forum in the form of Reddit. You can just like create a post and away you go.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things.
But I mean, if you just jump the gun and do it with Tor to begin with, before powers that be try to squash it,
Yeah. Well, and like I'd said before, humans love a challenge. That is and like what was that episode? I'm trying to remember, the TNG episode where they had to that planet through the wormhole, and they lost memory of like a day or whatever, and they came back to the planet, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, you came back, and Picard was saying, no, a mystery is irresistible to humans. Like, that is the thing, and these are worthy things to try to figure out.
Yeah.
And
that was a real boss save, by the way. Like, Picard being like, wait, give us a third chance or whatever it was at that point.
It was a second chance.
Yeah.
Consider the first a rehearsal.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Like, that was well played.
Oh, yeah. Very good. as
And
usual, like everything from that.
that's what I'm talking about. Like what I mentioned earlier, like law should really be treated more like theory. Like, you know what, like very well could have been like if the Klingons fell into that situation, it's probably not much of a chance that they would have done things differently five chances in, like
Mhm.
humans maybe, and sure enough, he made the argument where they were like, okay, you know,
And that's
we'll
why
bend it a little bit.
I generally make the distinction between law and legislation. So
Yeah.
law, in my opinion, is the product of court cases and legal proceedings within the court system. Um, and legislation is just a politician saying like, oh, we're going to do this thing. Rubber
Yeah.
stamp, done, boom. This is law of the land. No, it's not. It is not. It is a piece of
That's
legislation, and that should be treated like an experiment.
a
You're
good
like,
point.
okay,
Yeah.
fine. You proposed a thing. We're going to try it out and see what happens. And it should be revisited constantly and reanalyzed over and over and over again. And if it turns out that the expected outcome differs from the actual outcome, well, okay, well, obviously you can't consider that law. you know,
Yeah.
there's no way. I mean, that's wholly unscientific. So yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, geez, we covered like everything. We should
Right.
title this episode 42. Man.
I mean, yeah, it does frustrate me a little bit that there's so much potential with what we talk about. There's like there's a dichotomy of uh I don't know, like what's the word I'm looking for? Being humble
Mhm.
and recognizing something truly special in yourself, like
Yeah.
being like, like trying to cross that line between like, am I just like full of myself or am I actually like onto something, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
And it feels like we're onto something with this show,
I would say so. And that's I think what makes this show special. Oh geez, sorry, I'm falling off my chair here. Let me just adjust.
Need a UBI so you can go buy a fucking chair.
I know exactly. Oh man, good point. Uh, um, I think what makes this show special is the kind of the our different perspectives on things that because in general there's kind of this dichotomy of the general public of the masses, and I tend a little towards one side and you tend a little towards another side, but not like too far. And yet we're conversing about things and trying to figure out how, okay, it's like your ideas versus my ideas. And somehow, like, we come up with a completely novel idea that neither of us had before.
Yeah,
It's like, whoa, that's weird.
that's yeah. Like those are the bits that should be in the front. Like
Mm-hmm.
the teasers. Like, what were those ideas?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what were the things that brought these two people that think very differently into like one realm? And
Yeah.
those are the moments that people need to be making viral. Like
Well,
those are the Heineken ads.
exactly. And that's the thing too. It's like I think what another thing that makes what we do kind of special is that though we kind of have different views on things and different takes and different methodologies on the way we propose to achieve things, we're both the kind of people who want to work together with other people. That
Mhm.
I'm sure that you recognize just as much as I that you can't go it alone. That it's not going to
Yeah.
be one glorious person that's going to solve everything and one perfect idea. Like the only way
We
to
already are one glorious whole.
but like, because I'm always trying to figure out a solution that is acceptable for as many people as possible, and consider the opposing side, and okay, well, yeah, and think about where, put yourself in their shoes, basically empathy, and figure out a way to kind of meld those ideas together. And that's what we do on this show. We're just like, it's like two piles of Play-Doh, and we're mixing them together until they create a whole new color.
It's empathy against entropy.
Yeah. Ooh, dude, that's perfect. Damn. Well, that's a good way to end things, I
I think we found the title.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll yeah, I think that's good. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, whoever is still here, you're probably asleep. So, wake up. Um, thanks for sticking it out with us. And, yeah, this has been a good one. Leave your comments down there. I'm sure you've already left comments, probably, if you're, by now.
No, nobody's watching anymore.
No.
Sadly, all the answers in the world are right here, and people are like, "Ooh, is that somebody like juggling pizzas?"
That's actually kind of like a Twilight Zone sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. Fuck.
Well, it's kind of a downer, but I think it's also a positive thing.
Yeah.
Like, we will continue to work in the shadows. So rest assured, we'll keep working on these problems, and stick with us.